We talked last Monday about business models, and I didn't quite get done with that discussion, so we just moved some of that over to today. But at the heart of any business model and whether it's actually going to work are several fundamental questions. First of all, is there even a market? There are lots of ideas that people have had only to discover that there's really not much market. There is a market, it's not very large. So, is there a market? And perhaps equally important to the question of is there a market, how fast will that market develop if it's a new market? If you're in the pharmaceutical business and you invent a new drug, you can patent that drug, and the patent is good for 20 years, which is great. Except generally the first 8 years, you have to spend in clinical trials getting approval of the Food and Drug Administration, which means you basically aren't getting any money from that market for at least 8 years, and probably longer than that because the R&D was probably 2, 3, 5 years in the making as well. The problem with markets that develop slowly is that you can starve while you're waiting for the market to develop. You may have a great idea, the market may develop, but if the market develops in 30 years, you have to sort of figure out how you're going to live for 30 years. So there's a real question about how fast. Not unrelated to the question of how fast the market will develop is what investment will be required to help develop that market. Because part of what helps develop markets is how much you're willing to spend. If I've got deep pockets, then I can buy lots of advertising. If I've got deep pockets, I can get distribution. On the other hand, if I don't have much in the way of resources, I may have to go very slowly. So there may be, and I may need partners. We'll talk about some examples in a few minutes. But this notion of how much investment is not independent at all of what's going to take to develop the market. You're doing that now in bikes. You're in the market development phase. And by the way, you're spending money. And there's no revenue coming in. Well, that's the nature of most startup businesses. And then what you have to ask yourself is, okay, what are the economic implications of the answers to these three questions? How much money do I need now? When am I going to start to see money, some revenue, in the future? And how rapidly will that grow over time? Then you start answering those questions and you begin to think about, is this really a viable business? Or maybe it's a viable business, but for somebody else who's got more money than I have. This is why it's really important to do a market analysis. We'll come back to market analysis repeatedly in the course. But market analysis is really simply about, who buys and why. In the bike simulation, it's people who ride bicycles, but people ride bicycles for different reasons, which is why there are segments. Then the question becomes, okay, if we know something about who buys and why, what's the size of that market now, and what might happen to it over time? And equally important is what drives demand. What makes the market? And we talked earlier in the course about people don't really buy products or services, they're really buying benefits. They're trying to solve problems. So, what drives demand for dog food? It's not a trick question. Yeah.
Either how many animals you have, or if you have a dog.
Yeah. I mean, the answer to these sorts of questions often are pretty simple. It's surprising how often they don't get answered. So if you're in the dog food business, the size of that market depends on how many dogs there are. If you're in the disposable diaper business, what determines the size of that market? The number of little babies. And if you want to expand the market, then you've got to encourage people to have children. By the way, that could be a marketing strategy. But you want to understand what the drivers of demand are. And sometimes people confuse this. When the internet became a hot marketing tool a few years ago, there were all kinds of businesses that were developed to sell things over the internet. Most of them failed. Are you going to sell more dog food because you're selling on the internet? Why? Well, you could reach more people, but if people have dogs, they probably are getting their dog food somewhere, right? It's another way to get the product. It might be a more convenient way to get the product. But there's probably, people have dogs, they're probably already feeding their dog. So we're not going to increase the demand for dog food by selling over the internet. Probably not much anyway. Now, we might be able to take share, we may be able to take some of that demand away from a brick and mortar retailer. But that's different than acting on the total market demand. And it's really important to distinguish between how big is the market as a whole and how much of that market your business, is actually going to acquire. As you do your market analysis, as you've done in bikes, you want to ask if the market segments are present. Are they? In most markets there are, but not all. And that really gets to the heart of the question of, do customers differ in some way? There are very few really new problems in the world. So if you identified a market and a benefit that you're going to deliver, you might ask yourself, how do people get that benefit already? Or do they? There are lots of ways that people get things done that don't involve commercial products. So how are they doing it? With dog food, I can stick with my example. Before there were commercially available dog foods, there were dogs. They ate. Where did the food come from? Scraps from the table. And people were already doing this, just we may offer something that's different, better, more convenient, healthier. And in thinking about the competitive alternatives, it's important to recognize that competitive alternatives are just not the commercial products in the marketplace. People do lots of things on their own. They have their own solutions. In fact, you can often get some good ideas about commercial products by looking at how people solve problems without commercial products. If you were to ask people, let's say mechanics in a garage, how do you get the corrosion off of the automobile's batteries when people bring them in? That stuff that forms on the battery terminals. How do you get rid of that? What do you think they would say? There are commercial products that sort of keep the stuff off. But what you'll hear from a lot of mechanics is Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola will eat the corrosion right off of the terminal. Now, when you know that, you may not want to drink Coca-Cola anymore. But it's the nature of the carbonation that actually works kind of as a cleaner. Well, that's a solution. And if you're in the battery terminal cleaning business, you need to understand that that's a competitor. For many years, people used vinegar, just plain old vinegar, that you can buy for 19 cents a bottle, as a cleaning product. And they bought it instead of all the fancy, expensive cleaners that you could get in the store shop. By the way, studying consumers resulted in a lot of those commercial cleaning companies deciding that you should put vinegar in their products. You know, you've got lots of commercial products that are sold. We have vinegar. By the way, vinegar alone would probably work just as well, and it's cheaper. Maybe it doesn't smell as good, but it does the job. So what are the competitive alternatives? When we talk about the competitive alternatives, we're talking about what is the market definition. And the market definition is not a supply side issue. You may think that you're in the soft drink business, but you go talk to your customers, and they may quickly inform you that you're not in the soft drink business at all, you're in the beverage business. The choices they're making are not between one soft drink and another soft drink, but a really relevant choice is between a soft drink and a fruit juice or a water or a coffee. So when we do market definition, we go out and ask people really simple questions. When you're buying a beverage, what do you buy? What do you think about? What do you consider? When you're thinking about taking a trip for spring break, what do you consider? What are the places you consider? That now is the market definition from a customer standpoint. And then what we have to understand is once we know what those competitive alternatives are, we have to understand how do people choose from among those alternatives. People make choices. By the way, they typically don't line up all 500 characteristics of a product and weigh them carefully in order to make a decision. Usually people use at most 2 or 3, maybe 4 characteristics on which they compare products. And then they make a decision. That way in which people make decisions we call market structure. Market structure is just the way people put information together. By the way, different market segments may have different competitive alternatives, and there may be a different market structure. The reason being that, if I'm a mountain biker, there are certain characteristics that are important to me that may be completely unimportant to the casual recreational biker. Now, when I look at the market as a whole, there may be dozens of different characteristics that differentiate products and that people use for making decisions. But when I start looking inside the market, what I quickly discover is that most people are only using a small number of characteristics that they think are really important for their purpose. By the way, there's a classic paper in consumer behavior called The Cost of Thinking. And the reason people use a small number of things is that they just don't put in the effort to think about all those other many ways products may differ, which, by the way, are not very relevant anyway. All of you in your first course in marketing saw the product life cycle. All the product life cycle is a way of thinking about how a market develops over time. In bikes, right now you're here. By the way, that red line means you're spending money and there's no revenue coming in. You're about to introduce some products. Introduction will be slow. It takes a while for people to learn about a product. You won't have a lot of distribution early on, but over time, there'll be some growth that occurs. And then at some point, you'll hit an inflection point, and growth will really take off if it's going to be a successful market. By the way, notice that we still aren't making any money in the introduction phase, and really aren't making a whole lot of money even in the growth phase. Everybody loves to work with, stars, rapidly growing products. But it turns out that when products are in a market that's really growing rapidly, it costs a lot of money to support them. Because you have to advertise, you have to get distribution, maybe you have to do some product improvement. It's really only when a market begins to mature that you really begin to see a lot of profit that's there. Because typically what happens is that somewhere in this growth phase, you attract a lot of competition, and most of that competition doesn't survive. You hope you're lucky to be one of the survivors. And then we get into the mature phase, typically there are only 3 or 4 major competitors, and maybe a few little specialty niche players. And by the way, this tends to apply to all kinds of product categories. If you look at the history of railroads, for example, there was a time when there were thousands of railroads in this country, railroad companies. In fact, some of them only had a half-mile track. But that was their railroad company. And if you wanted to go from here to there in that half mile, they were the way to do that. Now, you can't really survive in a railroad business marketing a half-mile track. So over time, there was consolidation and merger, and firms went out of business, and suddenly we ended up with a relatively small number of players. But part of the key here is to figure out how you're going to differentiate yourself and survive so that you get to the point where you're actually a profitable entity. And what we do during the different stages of the life cycle really vary. So early on, in the introduction of a product, and now I'm talking about a new product category, not necessarily a brand in the category, nobody knows what it is. So you got to teach people what it is. In fact, that's a disadvantage of being first in the market, because you have the burden of teaching everybody what this thing is. Once you begin to attract some competitors and the market starts to grow, and if the market's growing, it will attract competitors. Now you have to figure out how you're going to differentiate yourself. So now branding becomes important, talking about how your product differs from other products. You may need multiple versions, because there may be segments. And then assuming you've survived the competitive shakeout, now you may be competing with 3 or 4 other large players, and the key there is to retain the customers that you've got. And you may need to fill out your product line. Maybe there's a segment you haven't yet been serving, so maybe there's a growth opportunity to introduce yet another product for a new segment. And finally, lots of products just go away. Market demand diminishes. It may not disappear altogether. And some companies are very successful selling products in very small markets that used to be large. Buggy whips. Anybody bought a buggy whip? No. By the way, you'll pay a lot for them, because the people who want them now actually are hobbyists, and they have discretionary income that they're spending on it. It's a little tiny market, but really nice margins. And by the way, there aren't many competitors. Why would I want to be in a declining market? Well, you might if it's a profitable market. So you need to think a little bit about where we are in the life cycle. If you're entering an established market, maybe you're coming in during the growth phase. You've got some competitors that are already out there. Now you have to think in terms of, how do I differentiate myself? The demand is already established. But I still have to get my product to people. I still have to offer something that has value. There is a myth that markets just sort of magically appear quickly. And that's really not true even today. Here's some examples. These are examples of inventions and when they were invented and when they actually became commercial successes. The fluorescent lamp, fluorescent lamps in here, was invented in 1859. Actually didn't become a a viable commercial product until 1938. So the technology was around, but there wasn't much market. And we can explore the reasons for that, but I won't take the time to do that. By the way, if you invented the fluorescent lamp and you hope to live off your income in 1859, you were not getting any income until 1938. You probably are dead. The cotton picker, the mechanical cotton picker, was actually invented in 1889. It did not become a commercial success until 1942. And there was a very specific event that resulted in the mechanical cotton picker becoming a commercial success. Anybody know what it was? Or guess what it was? Before the mechanical cotton picker, cotton was picked by hand. Needed lots of labor. What happened to the labor force in 1942? It went to war. That's when World War II began. And so suddenly, a perfectly adequate solution, people, hard work by the way, but people out picking because we're gone. So we still got cotton, we still need cotton, we still got to find a way to pick it. All right, I'll buy that crazy machine. The gyro compass, anybody know what a gyro compass is? The gyro compass actually works in 3 dimensions. So it not only tells you direction, but altitude. It was invented in the middle of the 1800s. It's been around a long time. It did not become a commercial success until 1908. What's special about 1908? That might have implications for a gyro compass. Something that tells you how high you are.
I don't know, maybe flight.
Yeah, the invention of an airplane. Yeah. There wasn't a whole lot of need for a gyro compass. I mean, maybe if you were a mountain climber, yeah, it might be nice to know how high you are. But there wasn't a really big market until we actually had airplanes. And so suddenly airplanes came along, and the demand shot up. Television was actually invented in 1919. It didn't become a real commercial success until 1941. Why? What do you have to have in order for a television set to be useful? Shows. You know, there's a very small market for people who simply want to watch a blank screen. So you have to have what we call an enabling infrastructure, and that involves broadcasters. So somebody's got to actually broadcast something for you to pick up on your television. You've got to have shows. It is something to broadcast. And it took 22 years to get all of that in place in critical mass to actually make television, the television that sits in your living room, a commercial success. So if you were an investor in television, guess what you need to spend your money on? I've got to develop broadcasting companies. I've got to develop production companies. Why? I don't really want to be in the production business to deal with those crazy actors and actresses. Yeah, but if you're going to make that a commercial success, that's necessary. One of my favorite inventions is the microwave oven. It was invented in 1945. Didn't actually become a commercial success until the mid-'80s. And of course, now everybody's got a microwave. We just take it for granted. The microwave was actually invented by a technician who was working on radar, devices for tracking aircraft and ships and other things. and he happened to have his coffee near a device he was working on, and he discovered that his coffee warmed up. And he said, that's an interesting outcome. I wonder if there's a way to commercialize that. And lo and behold, we ended up with a microwave. In fact, when microwaves first came to the market, they were called radar ranges. The legacy of the radar. But it took a long time for them to be adopted. Microwaves require people to learn how to cook completely differently. So if you put your metal pots and pans in a microwave, it'll blow up. Oops. So now we need pots and pans. Oh, and how do you cook? How do you cook? How do you bake a cake in a microwave? You get all kinds of packaging for food that were prepared for a microwave. So again, there was all kinds of other elements necessary to generate demand that had to be put in place. I mean, we literally had to teach people how to cook in a different way. The marketers were quite clever in selling microwave ovens. They said, if you'll buy a microwave oven, we will, at our expense, pay for a party at your home. And you may invite 12 of your friends, 12 of your neighbors. And there's only one condition of our giving you the money for your party. What do you think that condition was?
All the food has to be from the microwave.
Yes, exactly. All the food had to be cooked in the microwave. And so now you get 12 people, and everybody's saying, oh, you prepared that? You did that? How did you do that? Suddenly you get a lot of word of mouth. You get curiosity. It was a very clever way. And by the way, well, he can cook in that. I can do that. I'm an experienced cook. So we can make that happen. But again, sometimes we have to completely change people's behavior for a market to develop. The mobile telephone's been around since the 40s. Really didn't become a big commercial success until early 1990s. There were mobile phones around. The Army, armed forces used them, but they were big bricks. They weren't light at all. The personal computer's been around since the early 1950s, in one form or another. But didn't really take off as a commercial success until 1977. Because until 1977, what could you do with a computer? A personal computer. You could program it, and there's a market for programming. Not very large. Or there were some early games. One was known as Pong, where you just hit this little electronic ball back and forth. And there was a market for that. It wasn't very big. So there wasn't a whole lot you could do with a personal computer at that time, because it required knowledge of programming or what it could do that was pre-programmed was really quite limited. In 1977, a piece of software was introduced into the market that suddenly made personal computers useful for a lot of people. You've probably never heard of this piece of software, but it was called VisiCalc. And it was the first spreadsheet program ever introduced for a personal computer. And suddenly people could do all kinds of interesting things with spreadsheets. And they could do it at home. They could do it at their office. Video cassette recorder, invented in 1951, became kind of a commercial success in 1977. Again, What drove demand for a video cassette recorder? When it was first introduced, as its name implies, it was intended to allow you to record your television. There's some demand for that. Not a lot. There was a standing joke in the industry about households from throughout the country having a box that kept flashing 12 on the front, which means that they had not even set the clock, because they hadn't figured out how to use it. What drove demand for the video cassette recorder, and ultimately CD players and a whole host of other things? The availability of content. People didn't want to record, they wanted to play. What they really wanted was a video player. So now they need movies. And so once movies became available in a convenient format that you could get readily, that spawned a whole set of retail outlets where you could go and rent your videotape or buy it if you chose to do so. These days we stream things, but in those days, you had to go get a physical videotape. But until those were available, nothing developed. The best technology, by the way, for the early video cassette recorders was made by Sony. They made a product called Betamax. Very, very much superior to other technologies. Sony, however, decided that they only wanted to play with content providers who would record in the Betamax format. And most of the production companies said, no, we don't want to do that. And so inferior technologies actually came along and actually captured the market. So as you think about market development, you want to think about not just the customer, not just the product itself, but what's the whole product? What's the whole benefit the individual is seeking? So if somebody is really looking for a movie player, well, yeah, there's a physical player, but they also have to have something to play in it. And so the market's going to develop only to the extent that not only can they get the box, but they can get things to play in that box. So what are all the other things that are necessary? I had an epiphany moment a few years ago at the Smithsonian. I was in the Edison area, and it suddenly occurred to me, looking at all the things that he invented, why Edison spent the last half of his life building power companies. Why? I've got a phonograph, or I've got a motion picture machine, or I've got an electric light. It won't do me much good if I don't have power. And so he spent much of the latter part of his life trying to figure out how to get power to people, because that was necessary to create demand for all those wonderful things he invented. One way to think about the development of markets is in terms of, again, segments. There are people in most markets who just buy things because they're new and different. And there is a small part of that market. In fact, there are probably people who got a television before there was much to watch, just because it was new, it was a conversation piece. That's not a very big part of the market. It's an important part of the market, though, because they tell others. They provide a vehicle for others to see the product. But we call those innovators. And there are innovators in all kinds of markets. The problem with innovators is they don't stick around very long. They tend to be off to the next new thing, because they're looking for new, novel, interesting things. At some point, somebody discovers that you can actually do something useful with a product, So at the PC, they were innovators. Those were the people who were programming. They'd go home in their garage and they'd program their personal computer. But no, most of us don't want to do that. But along comes somebody who says, no, I think there's something useful that can be done with this. So the folks who developed VisiCalc said, you know what, we could turn that computer into, you know, an automated spreadsheet. You just need software. Oh, suddenly people say, I need that. That's a solution to a problem. And so we get what we call the early adopters. The early adopters are the folks who identify quickly that there's a problem, often a pain point for them, that can be solved with a new product, and they buy in. They're really important because they also tend to be risk takers. There's a lot of people in the market who want a proven product. So once the product is proven by the early adopters, we have an early majority that comes in, and then the real risk taker, risk averse folks come in a little bit later than that. And then there's a group that almost never adopts the new product. We call them laggards. These are the people who still have Princess telephones at home. And that's because they can't get the old rotary phone. They just like the old way of doing things. The adoption process is fairly straightforward. People don't have any interest in or buy things that they're not aware of. So we have to create awareness. And for a really new to the world product, it's not just awareness of I've got a new one. It's what is it? What does it do for me? Then we have to create interest. Okay, I know what it will do for me, but why would I want to replace what I'm using now? Well, let me give you some reasons. And then there's some evaluation, maybe some trial, and ultimately people may adopt. But a lot of what we do in marketing is about facilitating these things. Advertising, personal selling, really works on these things. Trial, giving samples. You know, if it's an inexpensive product, we just give it away. But there are other ways to facilitate trial. One of the reasons that automobile manufacturers have contracts with rental car companies is it's a way for people to get exposure to a car. They can try it out without buying. There are some things we know about factors that influence how fast products get adopted and how fast or slow they're not adopted. One of those is just the perceived advantage. What does it do for me? And how much better is it than the way I get things done now? So, what need does it satisfy? How important is that satisfy that is to satisfy that need? And what advantage does it provide relative to any other way to do it? If I'm satisfying an important need in a way that's more convenient, faster, less expensive than any other way to do it, that's going to speed adoption. People will immediately want it. On the other hand, there are a whole set of characteristics of products that can get in the way. The method of use, compatibility. My microwave example is a good illustration of that. People had to learn a completely different way to cook. Well, it's going to take a while to get people to learn to do that. Complexity, how difficult is it to use the product? How complex, or the other converse of that, how easy is it to use? If it's really easy to use, it'll facilitate adoption. If it's really difficult to use, it's complex, you need to take a class, it's going to be slower. How easy is it to try the product out? It's the buying, how easy is it to just sample it in some way? This is often why we put up demonstrations in places, so people can try it out. Or we do promotions. Come try our new hotel, we'll give you 50% off. It's a way to encourage people to try without ultimately committing. And in fact, related to that is just the degree to which the decision can be reversed. Particularly if it's a really expensive product. You can now buy what are called smart toilets. Smart toilets actually hook up to your network, your information network. And when you use them, they automatically will do various medical tests on your waste product. And you can transmit that into your doctor if you choose to do so. You can actually I saw one recently at Home Depot. They're actually there. They've been in Japan for a long time. The problem is not only that you have to buy the toilet, but now you have to have a plumber come in and install it. Well, guess what? That makes it rather difficult to reverse. Because now that I discover I don't like it and want to get rid of it, it's not just a matter of I'll take it out and give it to Goodwill or something. I'd have a plumber come in and replace it. It's not easily reversed. It's something that's not easily reversed. It's something people are going to think a long time about buying. To the extent that people can readily observe the benefit of the product, it will be adopted more quickly. So if I can see other people using the product and getting the benefit, public can use, then that will facilitate people adopting. But there's some things that are just not very visible. Any of you know what pre-emergent herbicides are? Herbicides are weed killers. Pre-emergent herbicides are weed killers that kill the weed before it comes out of the ground. Very powerful, important to farmers. Took a very long time, with some real benefits. But it took a long time for it to be adopted. Because how do you know it's working? I put it down and no weed comes up. Well, how do I know that the weed would have come anyway? I mean, with older herbicides where you would spray on the weed you could see, you could take great satisfaction in watching the weed turn brown and wilt and die. There's a lot of satisfaction that you saw the benefits you were getting. Hard to do that with pre-emergent herbicides. There are companies that are in the business of remote repair of computers and office equipment. They don't have to necessarily come visit you. They can do it from a remote location. They simply come in over the internet and do the fix. Those companies have had real difficulty retaining customers because you never see them. The contract renewal comes along. And why do we need to renew the contract? We didn't do anything. Well, yeah, we did. We fixed your computer 125 times in the last year. You did when? So what those companies have now begun to do is send reports. Here are the problems that we encountered. Here's how we repaired them. And by the way, when they do come on site, which they sometimes have to do, their repair people are trained to say hello to everybody. By the way, they don't go at midnight when nobody's around. They are specifically trained to go when people will be around, they can be seen, they can interact. It's making the benefit observable. And then some obvious things. There's cost. And when thinking about the cost, it's not just the acquisition cost that becomes an issue, particularly in business-to-business markets. There's also issues related to training. I've got a new piece of equipment. I've got employees that need to learn how to use it. It's going to cost me something to train them. There may be maintenance costs. In some markets, again, largely business-to-business markets, but in some consumer markets, products are often sold as a way of reducing what we call the lifetime cost of a product. So yeah, it'll cost you more up front, but you won't have nearly the amount of maintenance that you would have. So over the life of the product, it's actually less expensive. Markets differ, and because markets differ, and market segments within those markets differ, customer selection becomes really important. And if you remember, customer selection was the very first element of business model I talked about. So if you're going to select a market to enter, select a market segment to enter, yes, you want to select a market segment that is going to be large, profitable quickly. But you also want to take into account the extent to which that market may influence the rest of the market. There's an analogy called the bowling pin analogy. What bowling pin do you want to hit first when you're bowling? The head pin. Why? It's going to help knock all the other pins down. Part of what you want to consider in selecting a market to enter is there a market that's going to influence the market segment, that's going to influence the rest of the market? And then we need to think in terms of how do you extend your business model. We often think about business models in the sense of, a particular product, particular technology. That can be really limiting. So, Apple was a computer company. They still make computers, but they do lots of other things now. They're in the telephone business. They're in the music business. They're getting into the streaming video business. You may have heard just last week that the chairman of Disney resigned from the board at Apple. And the reason is because Apple and Disney are now the competitors in the streaming video business. It's just a conflict of interest. But Apple looks out and says, where are there opportunities? Where is growth occurring? And so one of the areas they've identified is healthcare, and they're now finding extensions of their products, their watches, their phones, that take them into the healthcare business. Google started out as a search firm, but they quickly expanded into advertising. They make a lot of revenue off of selling ads now, but now they're a phone company. Android is their product. They license it to Samsung and a variety of others, but it's their operating system. They bought Motorola. They brought out a device for a smartphone called Nest. So they're now into that business. And now they're working on things like self-driving cars. Disney's gotten into all kinds of other businesses and extended their previous business. They're into digital books. They've got apps. They've actually started language schools. In fact, because they have such reputation for service, they now are in the consulting business. If you're a service company, you can hire Disney to come in and help you improve your service. That's not part of their business. It's an opportunity to expand their business model. So, quick summary of business models. First of all, firms in the same industry, in the same market, can use very different strategies, very different business models to serve customers in those markets. There's not one business model. And there's not one successful business model. There can be multiple models that can be successful. Ultimately, though, business models are defined by what you deliver that's valuable, the value proposition. They are an explicit statement about how you're going to make money. So until you've explained to someone how you're going to make money, you haven't really given a complete description of the business model. It is not, however, a competitive strategy. Competitive strategy means how well are you going to execute compared to your competitors. You can have a really great business model and execute poorly. And there's a time dimension to a business model. Business models often become obsolete. There used to be a really nice business associated with selling music CDs. There's not much business there anymore. A little bit, but not much. So it requires that firms periodically and regularly think about what's happening in the world that might make a difference in terms of the success of my business model. Look at a company like IBM. IBM was first a business machine company that then became a computer company. Today, the hardware part of that business is really quite small. They've become a service company. And they've done that in response to what's happened in the marketplace. I'm going to skip over those things. I will say this in way of closing. You really ought to think about your career from a business model perspective. What's your value proposition? If you're going to describe to somebody, what you can do, what benefit you can provide, what would it be? And then how much you begin to get that out there to people. What's your revenue model going to be? One revenue model is you go to work for somebody else, and they will pay you to do a particular task. But another model could be to start your own business. That's a different business model. Or you can become a consultant. You're not actually running the business. You're not working for somebody else in the sense of being an employee, but you get hired to come in and help improve the business. Different business model. How are you going to distribute your services? How are you going to organize the activities? Do you need partners? Who are the partners going to be? So think in terms of your career as a business model. Ultimately, a business model is designed to generate cash. And there are really only three ways that firms generate cash from operations. Yeah, you can go borrow money from the bank. You can go find an angel investor. They'll give you money. You can find a venture capitalist. They might give you money. There are other sources of resources. But when we start talking about actually operating the business, there are really only three places where you get money from operations. One of those is customer acquisition and retention. Obtaining new customers, people who are going to buy your product or buy your service, and then holding on to them. And here what we're talking about really is the customer base. Increasing and managing that customer base for the growth. A second source of revenue is what we sometimes refer to as share of wallet in the category. This means increasing the frequency of purchase. To people to buy my product or my service more often. And I can do that in one of two ways. I could get them to buy more often from me rather than a competitor. That's called building market share. Or, in some cases, I might be able to get people to simply use the product more often. And I'm better off even if I have to divide up that among competitors. If people are using it more often. You see advertising campaigns that are designed to get people to use a product more often. Orange juice. It's not just for breakfast anymore. Whole campaign. Trying to get people to increase their usage. When I was in advertising, Campbell Soup was one of our clients. They made a product called V8. It's a vegetable juice. And we ran a whole series of campaigns that said, wow, I could have had a V8. It simply showed a consumer making a choice about a beverage and then suddenly realizing that V8 could have been a healthy alternative to what they selected. The fact it doesn't taste very good is ultimately matter. But that's share of wallet within the category. Either acquiring market share or increasing frequency of use or both. Finally, there's what we call share of wallet across categories. And here we're talking about finding new and additional products and services to sell to the same customer. So if I'm American Express and a credit card company, I can offer travel services. So they have a travel agency. In fact, American Express actually started out not as a credit card company, but as a traveler's check company. Very few people use traveler's checks anymore, but it was a really novel idea at the time. And then that was gradually replaced with credit cards. They now run the insurance business. They do a variety of things that sort of extend the scope of products they offer. We think in terms of Apple. Apple started out selling computers, but then they added a whole bunch of things. Well, you can add a telephone. And by the way, the telephone will integrate with your computer. Oh, and by the way, we'll sell you music that you can stream to your computer or to the phone. Now they're thinking about streaming video. So what they're doing is they're finding more things to sell to the same customer. And an advantage of that is they already know who the customer is. So they don't have to go find a new customer. They just have to go explain to the customer they already know, we've got something new and special for you. So as you think about business models, you probably want to think in terms of which of these revenue streams are going to be important. Could be all three, but you'll need to have at least one. As we think about generating revenue and ultimately profit, cash flow, what we need to think in terms of is, if we did nothing, how much would we sell? Well, if you're a completely new business, the answer is probably nothing. But in a lot of cases, when you're in an established business, the question becomes one of, is it worth investing more? Is it worth doing product improvement? Is it worth advertising? Is it worth expanding distribution? So here we get into the question of, what is the incremental contribution of a new activity? Because it's a marketing class, we'll speak mostly about marketing activities, but it could be other activities. So one of the questions you might ask is, what would we sell without marketing? Or what would we sell without additional marketing? The very important concept in the marketing world is something called baseline. Baseline is sort of the starting point. By the way, if you're in a very mature, established business, you can stop all your marketing for a period of time, and you'll still get sales. That'll eventually decline. But what you would get without having to spend on marketing is your baseline. And so when we begin to think about new activities, an advertising campaign, a promotion, what we need to think about is, how will that influence the baseline? Will it increase relative to the baseline? let's stay flat? Would it actually decline? By the way, a lot of promotions actually cost you money. Because one of the things we know about price promotions is they don't really cause people to buy a lot more product. What they cause people to do is change when they're buying. So when you go into the grocery store to buy laundry detergent, or just go to the grocery store, and you weren't planning to buy laundry detergent this week, you buy it next week, but you see your favorite brands on sale. Well, I'll buy it now. Yeah, that means they're not buying next week. And you're not buying next week at full price. So actually, I've lost money on that transaction. Now, there are some products where having the product available increases consumption. You probably don't do more laundry because you have laundry detergent. But there are products where if they're available to you, you consume them. What kinds of products are those?
Yeah, let's say like a company like Netflix, like as they produce more content, consumption goes up.
Yeah, and it's more available. Yeah. Snack products. You might not eat ice cream, but it's in the freezer, so you go have some. So there are products where these types of promotions that change timing actually pay out. But a lot of promotions just change timing and reduce revenue relative to baseline. So the question we have to ask is how much more will we sell if we spend on marketing or if we spend on a particular marketing activity? That's the incremental cash flow. And if the incremental cash flow isn't greater than the cost, we probably shouldn't engage in that activity. It's amazing how many marketing programs never ask this question. We're going to spend $5 million on an advertising campaign. Well, are we going to get $5 million or more in incremental income? If the answer is no, then why are we advertising? And ultimately, it's the baseline plus the incremental cash flow that gives us our total cash flow. So I've got a baseline. By the way, the baseline could be zero if it's a completely new to the world company. There's an incremental cash flow associated with something I do in terms of marketing, any marketing activity. And then when I put the two together, I get total cash flow. Marketing likes to take responsibility for all revenue and no cost, by the way. It doesn't work that way. So part of what you want to be able to do as a marketer is to justify your job and your expenditures on marketing in terms of the incremental cash flow that you're going to generate. We're going to run an advertising campaign. Well, that campaign will generate 1 million new customers, 1 million new subscribers. Each will pay $10 a month. 10 times $1 million is $10 million a month. That's $120 million. What's the cost of the advertising campaign? $10 million. $120 million in return over a year versus $10 million in cost. That's a no-brainer. An issue that came up earlier in the course is that as we begin to think about the marketing activities in which we engage and the incremental cash flow that we may generate, we have to recognize that some activities actually cannibalize sales in other ways. In fact, my promotion example is a good example of cannibalization. I cannibalize sales next week at full price with my sale price this week. Didn't pay off. But introducing a new product could be important, could pay off. But if that new product simply replaces one for one the sales that I would have gotten with the old product, I haven't really gotten any incremental cash flow out of that. Now, if I introduce the new product, and 90% of the people who buy the new product were not buying my old product, well, then that's 90% new business. That's all incremental cash flow. Probably makes sense to do that. A key concept in thinking about planning and the generation of revenue is how long will it take us to make back our investment? So if I think I'm going to get $10 million in incremental revenue, incremental cash flow, how long do I think it will take? If I spend on an advertising campaign today, how quickly will I realize the sales? Well, one way to look at this is to ask the question of how much more would I have to sell in order to cover the costs of my marketing expenditures? And this is what we call the break-even volume. Just how many additional sales would I have to make in order to cover the cost of what I'm doing in marketing? So, in terms of numbers of units, basically the fixed costs, whatever the fixed costs are, the cost of my advertising campaign, the cost of my trade promotion, divided by the contribution margin of each unit. Now I know how many more units I have to sell to cover my cost. By the way, I'm not covering the cost. What's the right decision? In most cases, don't do it. I mean, why would you spend more than you're going to realize? So here's a simple example. Let's suppose that I've got a can of Coke that generates 10 cents gross profit contribution, 10 cents margin. So if I spend $1 on marketing, how many more cans of Coke would I have to sell in order to cover my dollar? Well, if each can gives me an incremental contribution of 10 cents, I've got to sell 10 more cans to cover my dollar in marketing. Now, usually in marketing, we're not talking about spending $1. We're talking about spending hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. A single 30-second ad in prime time these days, any of the top 20 shows, is going to run you around $400,000. So we're not talking about small amounts of money. And so if I'm going to run that ad, then I have to ask myself, do I have any reason to believe that I'm actually going to break even? How much more would I have to sell to cover that $400,000? Or if I'm buying a Super Bowl ad, let's see, this past January, a 30-second ad in the Super Bowl ran $5.5 million. By the way, the software, the website company GoDaddy, the first 2 years of their existence, they spent their entire marketing budget on one Super Bowl ad. By the way, it probably paid off for them because it suddenly got lots of awareness. And they can show you the computation, the number of inquiries they got, the number of ultimate sales they got. It really paid out. Although, the gamble to spend all of your marketing budget in one 30-second spot. So we could think in terms of the volume, or we could think in terms of the revenue, in terms of what the break even. But the critical point to remember here is that we want to be able to cover the costs of the marketing activity with not total revenue, but incremental revenue. In most businesses, I'm going to get some business even if I don't engage in marketing. Or if I'm thinking about an additional marketing program, I'm going to get some business because of the marketing I'm already doing. So as I evaluate particular marketing programs, I want to ask the question of, how much more in the way of sales must I obtain in order to justify the cost of what I'm spending? This is one reason that you will hear firms talk about target volumes. They will talk in terms of target volume that basically represents the break-even. We're going to run an advertising campaign. We want that campaign to produce 1.5 million additional sales. That's the target volume. Well, how'd you come up with that? Well, it turns out that's the break-even point for the campaign. By the way, I'm going to be really unhappy if I just meet the target. Because all it means is I've broken even. But I at least want to break even. Or people may talk in terms of target revenue, the dollar amount that I have to sell. The past is not a problem in planning. I know what I've sold in the past. I know what I've done in marketing in the past. That's history. The problem is that in most cases, we're making decisions about the future. I'm going to spend on a new advertising campaign. I'm going to spend on R&D to improve the product. I'm going to open a new distribution channel. Okay? What will that cost? A number for that. Okay? So what's the incremental revenue? What's the incremental cash flow that we're going to get? And when we start talking about forecasting, and I'll have much more to say about forecasting in a couple of weeks, we're really asking the question, if we do X, we do this activity, what will we achieve? And often it's not just what will we achieve, but will we achieve something that's better than an alternative? A lot of decisions about marketing really come down to not whether we should market or not, but how we should market. Should I do a consumer promotion, a coupon, or should I do a trade promotion where I pay the retailer to put up an end cap on the aisle? Which would be better? And by the way, I don't have the resources to do both. So what can I forecast about the outcome of each? And then what's the return? What we're really talking about here is estimation of cash flows. And people in finance spend a lot of time talking about cash flows. They are filled with assumptions. And what I find among marketing people is they get very bashful about making assumptions. Well, how do we know that we're going to get 90% distribution? Well, we're making a forecast based on the assumption we're going to get 90% distribution. How do we know that our advertising campaign will reach 80% of the relevant households? Well, we don't. We're making an assumption that we can reach 80% of the households. I have to make assumptions if I'm going to forecast. Now, that doesn't mean that I ignore when I'm wrong. In fact, the assumption may be wrong. I didn't reach 80% of the households. I've reached only 70%. I'm not going to ask why. Can I fix that? But in order to estimate cash flows, I have to make assumptions about the events that are happening in the future. And I shouldn't be bashful about that. But there are some other problems that arise in trying to estimate cash flows. One of those is sunk costs. I've seen this in innumerable organizations. We've got to spend more. Why? Because we've already spent $1 million. Yeah, but nobody wants the product. It's a failure. People, our retailers are sending it back because they can't sell it. Yeah, but we've already spent $1 million. We've got to spend more. No. I mean, once you have figured out that something doesn't work, it's a good idea just to walk away rather than spend more money. But it's amazing how often managers will want to spend more on projects that clearly are proven to be failures. And they justify it by saying, we've already spent all this money. Yeah, you have. And you're not getting it back. But let's not spend more money. Inevitably, another problem that arises in cash flows is optimism bias. Yes, we have to make assumptions, but we need to be careful that we not be overly optimistic. And if you're a brand manager and you just launched a new product, you're really vested in the success of that product. You're really excited about it. So you have a tendency to be really optimistic about what it's going to do. Happens all the time. So it's really important to recognize that you can be biased and to really work at testing assumptions. And a third problem that arises in estimating cash flows is we often look at what's happened in the past. But most of what has happened in the past represents successes. Things that didn't work, we usually stop doing. So there's a selection bias. As we look back at the data we have, it tends to be the most successful things that dominates the information we have. Well, extrapolating from your successes to something that's new is really dangerous. And so again, you want to be careful that you're not making assumptions that rest on things that were known to be successful. In fact, this is one reason why firms will often do postmortems, analyses on failures. So they're trying to learn about what was it that caused the failure. And it's not just because they want to correct the failure. They actually want to incorporate it into how they make forecasts into the future. What went wrong? What kinds of things did we consider that we hadn't been considering? It is ultimately possible to link marketing activities to the value of a product. Not easy, requires a lot of data, but it's pretty straightforward. Here are some marketing activities. What do marketing activities influence? Well, they influence sales or market share. They can influence the price, both the absolute price that people will pay as well as the relative price compared to competitors. It can influence distribution, the ability of people to get the product. If I have market share here and I know the category volume, I can get some sense of the overall volume and how much I'm going to sell in a given period. If I can figure out the price, I can figure out the margin. So if I know how much I'm selling and what the margin is, I can get operating cash flow. And by the way, the value of a product, of a brand, is nothing more than the sum of future cash flows. And yes, we can discount those and probably should. But if we know what a brand is worth, one way to figure that out is to figure out what the discounted cash flows will be over some period of time. And none of this data is hard to get in most markets. There are lots of folks who provide market share data. Lots of folks who provide sales data. Distribution is just how many people can get your product. So what stores you're in and what portion of the market shops there. Simple percent. I know what my price is. I know what my price is relative to my competitors. Those numbers in the boxes and circles, they all have equations associated with them. So if I'm interested in the incremental product value arising from an incremental marketing activity, I can figure out what the incremental value may be by simply applying a simple set of equations. This is an example. We're just about out of time, so I won't take you through that. But understanding how the market's going to respond is really critical. First of all, will the market respond? It's a product, will the market respond to the product? It's an advertising campaign, will the market respond to the advertising campaign? If it's an increase in distribution, will the market respond? There are a lot of things to which markets don't respond. And we'll talk about market research here, but there's no reason you have to spend $5 million on an advertising campaign to figure out it's not going to work. We have tools and techniques and market research methods that help us determine whether an advertising campaign will work before we ever spend any money on media. And by the way, that's where the big money is in advertising. So it's buying the media. So we'll talk about some testing. But you want to know, will the market respond? How fast will the market respond? So how fast are we going to begin to generate whatever output we expect? And how fast will that then turn into cash flow? What's it going to cost us in order to make this happen? And again, as we talked about earlier, what are the economic implications of those three questions? So in terms of forecasting future cash flow, it's really about what do I think the future demand will be at a given price. And it's not independent of what I do in marketing. The reason we do marketing is because we believe it will have an influence on demand. We just need to find ways to market in a way that's efficient and that costs less than the incremental cash we intend to generate. Most costs actually are driven by meeting the demand. And fixed costs are actually pretty easy to forecast. I mean, if you've got a building and you're renting it, it's really easy to forecast how much the rent's going to be. A lot of the difficulty really revolves around the demand side of the equation. How is my activity going to influence demand? How do other competitors' activities influence demand? How does the general macro environment influence demand? And what does that imply? A couple of tools for understanding market research that we'll talk about in future class meetings. We'll talk about market research. We'll talk about some formal forecasting tools. But remember, not all customers respond the same way. So I may have a great advertising campaign for one group of customers, but it may not work for another. So again, another reason for segmentation.